Hello, listeners. Welcome to another emergency episode of the Jacob Shapiro podcast. For our second episode of the day, Kamran Bokhari comes on. There is no person who I wanted to talk to more about the future of Iranian politics based on what has happened in the last 24 to 36 hours. If you missed our episode earlier today with an Iranian security expert, you should definitely go back and listen to that one as well. Cousin Marco and I also put out an episode on geopolitical cousins. So if you are jonesing for content and if you are listening to this podcast, it means you're probably a geopolitical nerd, so you should be. You've got a lot of content to sort through and a lot more coming in the next 2 weeks if the Israeli promise that this is going to last 2 weeks is true. I have not been able to take a step back yet and sort of form my own analysis. I'm still in fact-finding mode and trying to understand what is real and what is not and what the possibilities are. But I plan to, sort of over the weekend, early into next week, hopefully put out a written piece that outlines some of my thoughts and scenarios going forward, and maybe even a solo podcast to talk about that. But for now, as you can tell from these podcasts and sort of from my questions and things like that, I'm trying to find as many different perspectives as possible, as much relation to signal versus noise as I possibly can, so I can craft those frameworks, and you're along with me for the ride. So take care of the people that you love. Email me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, things like that. Cheers and see you out there. Who better to talk about the apex of the Iranian Leviathan with than Kamran Bokhari? Kamran, good to have you on. I don't know if you know this, Kamran. Some of the editors in our Stratfor days used to lovingly make fun of you because there was a time where there were two phrases on the internet that only existed in articles that you wrote. It was apex of the Iranian Leviathan, and you also at one point described Iran's government as a murky spatial nexus. So you're famous beyond even your knowledge of it. It's good to see you, friend.
I think I had heard the first one, but not the second one. I didn't know that I was lovingly recalled for both phrases.
Both phrases, yes, murky spatial nexus. So, well, the Iranian Leviathan not doing so well here on Friday, June 13th at 1:07 p.m. Eastern Time. I was expecting an Iran-U.S. deal this year. I'm actually not sure that we won't get one by the end of the year. I will say, and I did not predict this at all. Yesterday on our company's research platform, I put a couple of articles about recent events with Iran and Israel and the U.S., and I said, this is escalating really quickly. And it turned out it escalated even quicker than I was expecting. Kamran, simplest question, your first reactions. How are you thinking about what just happened? Did it take you as off guard as it took me? However you want to take it, your first reaction.
So I think we were on the same page. My issue was that how does this, military campaign on the part of Israel square with the imperative of President Trump? And so that's the part that I was trying to figure out. I can't say I was shocked or surprised. I wasn't. But I was just trying to make sense of it. Okay, so we're having a negotiation. So how does this fit with that? And then finally, I figured it out. Earlier this week, if you recall, the president began to say something that he hadn't before in the 60 days since this diplomacy started. And we've had those multiple rounds of Steve Witkoff meeting with the Iranian foreign minister.
Yeah.
He said that I'm not so sure we're going to get a deal. And so that to me was, okay, that's very different from what we've been hearing. In fact, we've also seen sort of reports of, if you will, disagreements between the Israeli position and the American position. And so I was trying to figure out, and then, the president himself just last week had said that, I told Netanyahu that it wouldn't be a good idea to attack while we're still negotiating.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the president basically came to the conclusion that under the current circumstances, they've gone as far as they could, and it doesn't look like the Iranians are going to accept 0% enrichment. And they will not budge on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I promised, my supporters and those who voted for me that I am not going to put American forces in harm's way. We're going to steer clear of forever wars. But the Israelis are here and willing to do this. So let's say they strike at Iran. then probably they likely gamed this out, and they said the chances of the Iranians coming to the table after being hit, they probably concluded, most likely, would be much higher. So let's go through with this process. Now, before going through with this process, before sort of saying, okay, you do what you have to do, but we're not going to participate. We're not, this is your operation, you do it. The Americans had to be convinced, the Trump White House had to be convinced that this wouldn't turn into something much bigger. In other words, that the Israelis would succeed in whatever, military goals that they had laid out for themselves, elimination of top IRGC leadership, attacking, if you will, nuclear facilities, with the knowledge that the nuclear facilities would not be completely dismantled because they're deep underground, and the Israeli Air Force is not the American Air Force. They do not have strategic bombers, and so on and so forth. And so there's going to be limited damage, but also there will be damage to the ballistic missile inventory of Iran, which is also an issue. So I think once the White House was convinced that, okay, these guys have a sound plan, let them go ahead and do it, and then we'll take it from there. And I think the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. I've asked this question of myself and of a couple different people this morning so far, but you are the one who I most wanted to ask it to, because I don't, for my money, nobody knows more about the inner workings of Iran than you do at the top leadership level. Based on what you've seen so far, do you think this is a strike against Iran's nuclear capability, or do you think this is an attempt at Israel rolling the dice on regime change within Iran? And I ask that because, if you listen to Benjamin Netanyahu's 7-minute speech last night, it's heavy on the, hey, Iranian people, you are not our enemy. It's the regime that has dominated you that is our enemy. Let us overthrow them together. Iranian pride is coming. Even the name that they dubbed the operation with, what is it, Rising Lion, the lion which was also on the flag of the Shah, some very subtle cuts at things like that. And also, the decapitation strike against senior levels of the IRGC, the guy who was overseeing the nuclear negotiations, some scientists. You have to think also that, the Hezbollah playbook is there. So maybe Israel is saying, okay, that was round one. We're ready for up to 2 weeks. Mr. Khamenei, Mr. Iranian president, y'all want to be next? We know where you all are. We can hit you. We have control of the sky. So anyway, do you think that Israel could actually be thinking they can initiate regime change here? Do you think that's not what they want? Do you think that that is what they want and it's not possible? I'm just really curious for how you're thinking about that, because it seems like, at least, when you're first looking at it, I can't think of a moment where this regime in Iran was under more stress and pressure than it is here today.
I agree with you on that. But the three scenarios that you've laid out, I have a fourth one. The fourth one is that the Israelis, all things being equal, do want the regime gone, but they're mindful of their limitations and constraints. They're also mindful that this is a very large country, geographically and population-wise, somewhere between 90 to 100 million people. The regime has embedded itself over the last nearly 50 years in, all across the country. They may not be a military power overseas, and they may not be able to defend themselves, against Israeli airstrikes and intelligence operations, but they run a pretty effective police state. And so, if you look at regime change, the United States recently tried to do it twice, and we failed on both occasions. We didn't fail in sort of toppling the government, removing the government of the time, but then, it was regime collapse, not regime change, not the change that we desired. Afghanistan and Iraq. Iraq fell into the Iranian orbit and also became a haven for Al-Qaeda, later to become ISIS, and so on and so forth. Afghanistan, we took out the Taliban, and then we left them to them again. So I think the Israelis are mindful of how, and we put in ground forces. So even with ground forces, The United States couldn't accomplish that. I think the Israelis know that this is well beyond their capability. But what they are doing is they are creating the circumstances for a regime, if you will, internal struggle, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think you remember my report from last year in April 2024 called Post-Khamenei Iran, the future of evolutionary regime change. So there is an evolutionary regime change taking place and has been in Iran going back 15, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if you notice the targeting so far, I mean, this could change, within minutes, given how fast the developments are changing. But so far, we have only seen IRGC commanders being targeted, not the regular armed forces. And the regular armed forces is a parallel institution, numerically much larger than the IRGC, but obviously not with the IRGC's clout, financial, political, etc. And so it seems like they're at least removing people who were ideologically motivated, if you will. And even within the guards, not everybody is at the same level of ideological indoctrination. So I think what they're trying to do here is to force some sort of a behavioral change in this regime, and that obviously happens when new people or new centers of power can, come to the fore. So let's just sort of game it out. I'll put myself out there. This is a national catastrophe for Iran. There have to be people blaming, other people in the regime, within the elite and within the security establishment for leading them down this path. And so if, let's say, things get out of hand, let's say there are protests that start taking place in Iran, let's say that there is internal chaos, then we could see a coup. A coup where, let's just say, the regular armed forces that are not as ideologically conditioned as the IRGC, they, along with some pragmatic elements from the IRGC, basically say, we're declaring a state of emergency in the country, and we're taking over in order to preserve the republic, blah, 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 whatever speech they have to give, they'll give in order to stabilize the situation. So I think that we can expect. How quickly, I don't know, because I don't know what the level of damage has been done to the regime, because this is happening in real time as you and I are having this conversation. There's a lot more to come.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects of it. But one clarification I wanted to get from you: this, the chief of staff, Mohammed Bagheri, I think is his name. Is he? I know he was an IRGC officer, but was he technically chief of staff of the armed forces, or was he IRGC? Because I thought he was one of the guys they got.
So he is very much IRGC. He comes from the IRGC, but he was the chief of staff of let's just think of him as the Joint Chief of Iran. So in the United States, the chairman of the Joint Chief is the highest ranking military officer. In Iran, they're called the chief of staff of the armed forces. Now, the armed forces, if you will, comprise the IRGC and the Artesh. Now, the guy who replaced him, Mousavi, he is from the Artesh. He is not IRGC. So there has been sort of, people have rotated in and out in terms of who holds the defense minister position. Sometimes it's an IRGC guy. Sometimes it's an Artesh person. Likewise for the chief of staff of the armed forces position as well. So, but they are all from IRGC. Even the retired one, Admiral Ali Shamkhani, he is from IRGC Navy, though he did control the Artesh Navy as well at one point. But if you look at the head of the Khatm al-Anbiya, complex, which is the engineering / industrial arm of the IRGC, that guy, Ghulam Ali Rashid. If you look at Amir Ali Hajizadeh, who is the IRGC aerospace commander, if you look at Ismail Qani, he was the successor to Soleimani as the head of the IRGC QF, the overseas operations arm of the force. So I think that we're looking at a deliberate targeting of a particular section within the armed forces. And is Israel trying to sort of maneuver the pieces? Likely. But does it think it can go too far? I doubt it. I think Israel is very well aware of its ability at that level. It's one thing to have Mossad operatives and special forces guys, fly in C-130s and land and, operate on Iranian soil, of course, with help from the locals, and be able to deploy drones and then the airstrikes and so on and so forth, gather intelligence, know who's where and what. I mean, that's just a phenomenal level of intelligence penetration. So that's one thing. But to be able to completely shift that Leviathan or that, murky nexus, that's another thing.
Do you think that they will try to assassinate Khamenei? Do you think that's coming?
My question is, what will they gain out of it?
Listeners, I just want you to know that Kamran, you have mastered the Jewish art of answering a question with a question, but go for it.
No, I'm just saying, is there a benefit to it? Is there something to be gained from? And it has to, look, there's a cost to it. He's still sort of the head of state or the leader of the regime, whatever it is. That sets a different level of a precedent. I don't think the US wants to go there. I don't think Israel necessarily wants to go there, because at the end of the day, he's just one guy. He's very old. He's 85. He's going to go anyway. Why not cut his arms and legs off, which is what is happening. So his regime is falling apart in real time. I mean, I'm pretty sure that in the twilight years of his life, this is not what he had planned for. And so, you sort of move pieces around, you weaken the guy, you weaken the system to where different centers of power struggle, and you have a different kind of political elite emerge. Now, that's a very unstable situation that can go awry very quickly. You don't want sort of like a Sudan level situation where two rival militaries are going at it, at each other. But yeah, that's how I would answer that question. I just don't see the benefits.
What happens? So I hear you. Let's say that it does. Let's say that whether by Israeli attack or because he has a heart attack from all the stress, that Khamenei dies tomorrow. Like, what happens then? I mean, it probably is just an acceleration of the dynamics that you talked about internally. But I don't know. Just curious, what happens if you really do cut off the head of the snake?
So in my report from last year, I obviously did not factor in, nobody could have, what is happening today. But I did sort of say, okay, let's say this guy, whenever this guy is going to go in a year, 2 years, whatever it is, 6 months, we don't know. But he's 85, he's not going to last long. And, you can last long and you could still be ill and not be, of any use. And then you have to be replaced. So that opens up a whole can of worms. So first of all things being equal, you have a new supreme leader. The Assembly of Experts technically has to elect someone, which is that 88 member clerical body whose sole job is to elect, hold accountable, and potentially impeach. You theoretically impeach the supreme leader. None of that has ever happened. But my report said ultimately the next supreme leader will be the one who the two militaries can agree on. And so, in other words, that supreme leader is going to be a puppet. Now, that said, there's another wrinkle here. The wrinkle is that the Constitution allows for an interim period where the head of the judiciary and the president and I believe the head of the Guardian Council form a temporary leadership council. So not just one man being replaced by another man. This is temporary. Now, if you remember Ayatollah Hashmi Rafsanjani from years past, he and many others came up with this idea that let's actually have a leadership council instead of one supreme leader as a permanent thing. So there are those ideas that have actually been discussed in quite detail within this regime. So the point that I'm trying to make is we don't know. But under the current circumstances, it would make sense for, in the scenario that I painted that did not foresee and is an unprecedented scale Israeli military campaign against Iran on the home front, I thought that the military would be, ruling from behind the scenes, but it would sort of become a military-dominated state. Yeah. In this scenario, given what has happened since last night, I would not put a coup past, the commanders, some of the commanders, because it all depends on how desperate they are, how vulnerable they're feeling. And remember, when something of this magnitude happens, the first thing to go out the door is, trust and confidence of their own institutions, their own allies and colleagues. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of questions that are being asked, and I'm pretty sure behind the scenes, this has already begun, that whose fault is it that this is happening?
Yeah. I cannot shake the conspiracy theory emerging in my brain that, Khamenei he's old, he's ailing, he's had so many problems. Boy, would it be useful for him to be a martyr for the future of the Islamic Republic at the hands of the Israelis, of the little Satan. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen. It's just a weird, dark thought I've been having. Okay, I know we have you for a limited time, and there's still 3 questions I want to get to. So the first is, you already sort of led to it. You talked about desperation. Everybody that I've talked to this morning, Iranian security analysts, some other geopolitical analysts, even Israeli analysts, it seems to me that they're all closing in on the same idea, which is namely that Iran is screwed and was incompetent and couldn't defend itself from the Israelis, that the Israelis control the skies, the Mossad is on the ground, they're doing whatever they want. What is the Iranian response? Do they have any response? I mean, do they have most of a weapon completed that they can turn on and try and establish a nuclear deterrent? I mean, it can't be the Persian Gulf, because then you're inviting the United States to come bomb the living crap out of you. I see nothing on the chessboard for them. Do you?
I think the options are bad, and very bad, and worse. So you're right. If they try to mine the Straits of Hormuz, that's just going to invite the United States. If they attack U.S. bases in Iraq, across the Persian Gulf, then they invite, retaliatory strikes from the United States. Then their situation goes from bad to worse. They're in the frying pan, they'll be out in the fire. The big question is, can they pull off a few waves of retaliatory strikes with drones and missiles? The reason I say that is twofold. One is that they can't go from where they are right now straight to the negotiating table. No. They have to be able to show that they just didn't throw in the towel. They just did not capitulate. So the way this is sort of engineered is, you prepare for these strikes, you let the other side know it's coming, and you let them know that we're doing this because we have no choice, but we are not interested in further escalation. So you struck, we struck, now let's get back to the table. And so that's something that I can see happening. Now, but there's a second part to that, which is the capability of doing that. Mm-hmm. So right now, the Iranian regime cannot protect its own people, its own leaders. and the elite of the elite. So if you cannot protect them and you're penetrated by Mossad, then how can you assume that you can actually go ahead and try to, because you'll need to bring out these missiles from somewhere, okay? You need to physically bring them, launch them. So if you go down that path, how do you know they're not watching? How do you know that the leaks are not that extensive? How do you know that they'll not see it on a radar and they will come in and bomb you? Same thing for the nuclear test. Your facilities are already under a lot of pressure. Now, can it be that they have some secret facility that nobody knows about, which is where that test was planned all along? Yeah. But what are the chances that that is true? Slim. So I think that considering all of this, their best path forward is to go through a choreographed, if you will, retaliatory move, but the emphasis being on that, hey, we don't want this to get more ugly than it already has. So now, having said that, this assumes that everybody in the regime is on the same page. Right now, they're fighting. This is what you and I are, this is what desperation does and what you and I have been discussing. Now, under this current situation, can they agree onto this formula? Yes, and maybe no. So we don't know. It's just,
and can they pull anything off at all? They apparently, or at least the Israelis say, they already tried a drone strike, and they got rid of the drones before they even got to Israel. So it's not even
apparently
clear
the Jordanian Air Force was involved in that as well.
Wow. Okay. Well, that gets to the second, and I'll smush these next two questions together because I know you got to go and you've been generous with your time. I think one of the things that has not been talked about enough in the analysis of this is regional response. So Saudi Arabia pretty strongly and harshly condemned Israel for what it did. I haven't heard a word from Turkey. You mentioned the Jordanians. Pick whichever ones are most interesting to you, from a regional perspective, the countries that have not been talked about. How are they reacting to this? Are they cheering on Israel quietly, even as they condemn them? Are they like, oh my God, is Israel going to do this to me next? Tell me what you think the regional response is, especially for some of those heavyweights.
I think it's a mixed feelings. They're relieved that this threat, that they've come close to the point where maybe this threat is no longer going to be around. So damage to this regime is, all things being equal, good for the Turks, good for the Saudis, good for the Arab states, because they live in that region. And, Iran and Turkey, you and I have talked about this quite a bit, are historical competitors. So that's one side of it. The other side is, well, yeah, we don't like the Iranians. We also don't like the Israelis. And it's based on what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so does this leave Israel far more powerful in the region? To your point, can they do this to us tomorrow? That's what the Turks are thinking. The Saudis are thinking about this as well. And so this has to be on their mind. So I guess, in a region as complex as the Middle East, if one actor came out today, in the current moment, it's Israel. Dominating the region like this. Look, destroying Hezbollah, going after Gaza, hitting the Houthis, creating the conditions for the toppling of the Assad regime, and now hitting Iran on its home front. In the region, it's perceived as one state having too much power. And that is going to make them uncomfortable. But that is not something that they have to necessarily solve today or in the short term. This is a long-term problem for them. How do you work out a new, modus vivendi with Israel? And, the UAE has the Abraham Accord deal. Saudi doesn't. Turkey has diplomatic relations, but relations aren't so great. And so what will be the new cadence of a relationship with Israel and its neighbors is something that, is going to be an issue that's going to dominate the region's geopolitics for quite some time to come.
And I'll get you out of here on this. Is this good for Israel long term? Is it bad for Israel long term? Is it something else? Like, how do you think about this from the Israeli perspective?
So I think long term, the Israelis, so following up from that, what I just said earlier about how the regional states perceive Israel. So now that Israel has sort of the upper hand militarily against its adversaries, its big challenge is how does it sort of make friends or reach out to the Saudis of this world and say, let's forge, a relationship. How do you go back to the Turks and say, okay, you know what? Yeah, we disagree on a lot of things, but you never completely did away with our diplomatic relationship. We downgraded relations, back in 2010, but we're still, neighbors. We have to work together. The biggest thing between us is Syria. So I think for Israel, the challenge will be, how do you get away from sort of the fighting to creating sort of a peaceful order? How do you what will that post-conflict normal look like? That will be the challenge for Israel.
Yeah, not an easy question to answer. All right, Kamran, I've already kept you longer than we agreed to. So thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm sure we'll talk again in the next week or two, because the Israelis say this is going to be 2 weeks. So buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Thank you so much for listening to the Jacob Shapiro podcast. The show is produced and edited by Jacob Smulian, and it's in many ways the Jacob Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, or leave a review. It takes just a couple seconds of your time, but it really helps us. Also share with a friend. If you're interested in learning more about hiring me to speak at your event, or if you want to learn more about the wealth management services that I offer through Bespoke or at Cognitive Investments, you can find more information at jacobshapiro.com. You can also write to me directly at jacob@jacobshapiro.com. I'm also on X for now with the handle Jacob Shap. That's Jacob, SHAP, no dats, dashes, or anything else, but I'm not hard to find. See you out there.